is Totally 80s, the podcast dedicated to the music of the greatest decade ever. So, turn up your Walkman, loosen that scrunchie, and get ready to talk 80s with your host, Lyndsey Parker.
Hi, I'm Lyndsey Parker from Yahoo Entertainment and SiriusXM Volume, and this is another episode of Totally 80s. If this is the first time you're joining us, why not take a second to follow us at Totally 80s on Facebook and Instagram, or email us your comments and show ideas to podcast@totally80s.com. You can also check us out on video as well on our Totally 80s YouTube channel, so check that out if you are so inclined. And joining me today is the Ziggy to my Stardust. That's not an 80s reference, but it is John Hughes.
I'm the screaming to your Lord Byron.
Sure. We'll definitely get into some 80s Bowie talk. The 80s Bowie experience is an odd one because it encompasses so much. It encompasses some of his biggest commercial highs, at least here in America, some of his biggest critical lows, everything in between. Obviously, neither one of us are absolute beginners when it comes to today's topic, which is, in case people haven't figured this out, today's episode is all about the Thin White Duke, or as he was known in the 80s, Screaming Lord Byron. In case you haven't guessed it by now, we are talking about David Bowie, specifically David Bowie in the 80s, and we have the perfect guest to join us. He is an author and a music journalist who is a longtime contributing editor at Rolling Stone, and he has written several fantastic books, including one about this very subject, David Bowie, entitled On Bowie. So when I thought about who would be a perfect guest for this was the first guy I thought of, and I'm so happy he is able to join us. Please welcome to Totally 80s, the author of On Bowie, Rob Sheffield. Yay!
Hey. Good to see you.
It's so good to see you. I have so many things to talk about. Obviously, your book doesn't just encompass 80s Bowie, it's beginning to end. But as I mentioned just now, the 80s chapters are so interesting because it's so many highs and lows, commercial lows, critical highs, critical lows. And I want to talk a little before we get into 80s Bowie. I understand, first of all, it's been 5 years since David Bowie died, which is why we thought this was a timely, it's been 5 years, as the song says, why we should do this podcast now. It's crazy, man. It's been 5 years because he's never left any of our collective consciousness. But my understanding is you kind of wrote this book on Bowie in sort of a fever dream. Like he died and you immediately were inspired to write this book, relatively quickly, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the process that made you want to do this book?
Yeah, I started, it was the night he died. If you remember, like the news was announced at like 2 a.m. On Eastern Standard Time. Mm-hmm. And I just watched a crummy award show that I was supposed to be writing about, so I'd stayed up late writing. It was the Golden Globes, which...
That's right. It was the same night as the Golden Globes.
Yes.
How about that?
Beautifully, worst night in history to win a cheesy award. Like, nobody remembered Sylvester Stallone's Best Actor trophy a few hours after it happened because this news came over, and my friend Karen, who had just been over our house watching the Golden Globes, she texted, I was like, did she leave a sweater behind or something? And no, she was like, nope, terrible news. And I stayed up all night writing, and I was in the middle of writing a book about the Beatles, which eventually came out like a couple of years ago, Dreaming the Beatles. But I was writing about David Bowie. It was 2 a.m. Everybody I knew who was awake was in touch. Everybody was emailing, texting. I could tell who was awake and who was asleep. I was writing an obit for Rolling Stone, and I was writing till dawn. But I just kept writing and kept writing after that was done. And the thing is, my editor, who's been the editor for all my books, Carrie Thornton, she world's biggest Bowie fan, just like puts me even, makes me look like a dilettante, and although not you. And but I knew she was not awake yet. And I didn't want to wake her up. I wanted people to keep sleeping before this terrible news hit them. And she called at 8:02 a.m. and she was like, unbelievable. And she was like, you know what? We have to put the Beatle book aside for a few months, and we have to do one for Bowie. She's like, we owe it to him. Let's do this. And I was like, well, that makes sense because I've been writing about Bowie for, all night, and I stayed up all day, and we ended up like doing the book in just a couple of months.
Wow, that's crazy. So, as I said, the book, of course, encompasses his whole career, but the 80s chapters are fascinating. And I'm going to guess, based on reading your other books and knowing what your tastes are, Rob, that the 80s was probably the decade in which you were first introduced to Bowie. And it started off well, didn't end so well, but I thought we'd just kind of go through the mixed bag and start, with the kind of, the beginning of the 80s, which I think it was like sort of set the tone for the new romanticism to come. If you remember the Ashes to Ashes video, which I'm sure you remember. So it's the Scary Monsters album. Obviously Ashes to Ashes. I think, if I'm not mistaken, like Steve Strange from Visage is actually like in that video, along with all of the Blitz Club kids who, of course, owed such a debt to Bowie. They all saw Top of the Pops, Starman, and all decided to start bands 10 years later. So it's 1980. Major Tom has been revived on a beach with Steve Strange. The video is happening with Alan Hunter. I remember thinking it was so cool that Alan Hunter, the VJ from MTV, was, dancing, doing the interpretive dance in that video. So what are our memories of like that album and sort of like, David Bowie was so influential on all the MTV artists that came up in 1980 or 1981 and so forth. And here he was kind of already still being a video vanguard, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it was an entire decade of Bowie's. It was the best time to be a Bowie fan. I was a little kid, and I was just discovering David Bowie. Lodger was the first one that came out that I remember. Okay, this is the new David Bowie album, and it was so different from the stuff that he'd done before that he was so famous for. And Ashes to Ashes, Fashion, Scary Monsters, these were so different from Lodger, and that was like a really exciting time to be a fan of an artist like that, who was like obviously determined not to repeat himself. I remember staying up to watch him on Saturday Night Live when he did Boys Keep Swinging and The Man Who Saved the World and TVC15, and I was like, wow, this is an awesome. I'm 13 years old and I have chosen my hero wisely.
Very wisely. And
it's going to be a part of my life forever. And Scary Monsters, it was yet another move. It was okay. I had a great run with Lodger. I'm not doing the same thing again.
And that for me, I hate to say it, but that was my introduction to Bowie. I mean, he already kind of seemed in 1980 like a classic rock or elder statesman to me, because I was aware that he'd been around for a while. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I heard the Major Tom reference in Ashes to Ashes, I didn't even know that was referencing an older song, but it was that video in particular. And also the other videos that were kind of running on MTV at the time, like even though this is like a late 70s, but like Look Back in Anger and Heroes, and DJ was another one that was played a lot in the early days of MTV. That kind of made me look back, but definitely he started off the 80s in 1980 very, very promisingly,
Let's talk about that, because you start with Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. It's going to be tough to go up from there, so I do understand the shift to being commercial with Let's Dance, but it's funny you guys have like these different experiences coming on board with Bowie in the 80s than I did. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, so Bowie was a figure that loomed large in Cleveland because we broke him in the early 70s.
Cleveland invented Bowie.
Yeah.
Cleveland made Bowie.
Exactly.
That was his first US gig, right? Was there?
Yes. And here's the weird thing is I didn't connect all those dots when WMMS was playing Bowie. Like I thought for the longest time until I was in my early teens, Rebel Rebel was a Tom Petty song because he sounds like Tom Petty to me. And this is what's going on in my scrambled, messed up brain as a kid.
All right. Guitar-wise, I guess maybe a little.
Kinda.
You were confusing it with I Was Born a Rebel.
Maybe, who knows what was going on. But like you, MTV changed everything. First of all, the funny things, the Look Back in Anger, scary, his face is turning into paint. What's going on? DJ, he kissed a guy on the street. Did you guys see that? He kissed a guy. These were like videos that were subversive and scary to a Midwestern kid at 11, 12 years old. So I ramped up, Let's Dance, I kind of got into, but A Scary Monsters, Super Creeps is such a great album. How do you follow that the entire decade? I can see why there was a little floundering.
But he followed it with, if not necessarily looked back upon as his best record, his, if I'm not mistaken, you would know this better than me, John, because you're good with the charts. His most commercially successful in America was Let's Dance, right? By far.
For sure.
So it's interesting because do you think this was a sellout record? I just interviewed Mike Garson, who was obviously the longest running off and on band member of Bowie. He was in various Bowie bands. And he said that when he kind of started playing with Bowie again in the 90s on Outside, that Bowie had basically sort of had some regrets that he felt that he had sold out in the 80s. I think he was maybe referring a bit more to Never Let Me Down than to Let's Dance. And we'll talk about Never Let Me Down later, which did let us down. It did not do what the title said. It let us down. But anyway, going back to just the 80s in general, Mike Garson told me that, David Bowie had some misgivings about, quote unquote, selling out in the 80s, which is why he took the turn with the techno stuff that he did, the electronica stuff he did in the 90s. Do you think, what was the memory back then when Let's Dance came out, particularly among older fans, the ones who remembered his 70s work, his groundbreaking glam rock work, whatever, his Berlin trilogy, etc. Was this record, Let's Dance, well received, or were people like, what the hell is
extremely well received? There was I think it was because his later records, Tonight and Never Let Me Down, that sort of instilled the sort of narrative that Let's Dance was some kind of falling off. But the older Bowie fans that I knew, they totally loved Let's Dance. The key is this was the latest Bowie. Nobody thought that this was the final station. There was going to be another station, 2 station after this. And he'd already done so much, just so much cavorting about stylistically in the 80s. In between Scary Monsters and Let's Dance, in between those 2 albums, there was a layover of a couple of years. And he had 2 completely different standalone hits on rock radio. One has gone on to be mega famous, and the other one has fallen into obscurity. One, Under Pressure with Queen, and the other one, Cat People, Putting Out Fire, which...
The superior original version by Giorgio Moroder.
Yes, the version. I think if you could go back in time to 1982, the average Bowie fan would be shocked that in the future, everybody on Earth would know Under Pressure by heart and would hear it every day, and Cat People would completely disappear.
You guys remember, Under Pressure was not a huge hit.
Yeah, MTV. I actually remember when that video was on MTV, I didn't like it because it was all was it not Metropolis, but it was it was all old silent movie stuff, and Bowie and Queen were not in it, and I was not a fan of any music video back then that the star, back then I didn't even like Chauffeur by Duran Duran because Duran Duran weren't in it. I wanted my artist to be in the video.
Lyndsey.
Well, I said back then. Let me say I've changed my mind since.
Your dad did this. We learned on an earlier podcast.
My dad was a fan of both the Girls on Film and Chauffeur videos that I made. But anyway, I digress. Let's stay on Bowie. Although we probably will talk about Duran Duran later because we do eventually have to talk about all the 80s artists that took such a nod from Bowie. But going back to the Let's Dance era, going back to the Under Pressure era. Yeah, that song became not just one of Bowie's biggest songs, but Queen's biggest songs as well. But it's interesting because, and I think you might have written this in your book, Rob, it doesn't really actually sound like the discography or it doesn't really sound indicative of the signature sound of either artist. It's kind of a one-off.
Either of them. I mean, the hook is a flute, not a lot of flutes on Queen records, definitely not a lot of flutes on Bowie records. I think this is the only one. And, I've come to love Under Pressure. I mean, it's a great song. It's a one-off for both artists. It's totally a standalone. It's really different from anything else they did. It's an oddity for both artists, which is why it's so weird that it's arguably the most famous song either of them ever did. But
why do you think Cat People did not reach the same level of success? And you're right. I don't think it's a song that people tend to think of when they think of Bowie's output, or even when they think of Giorgio Moroder's output. It's not one of the songs people think about.
Or Natasha Kinski's output in the 80s. Definitely like a theme from one of her finest movies, where she's transforming into a panther periodically in the middle of the night. With Cat People, it begins as this torch song, that it becomes this like really like amazing goth epic. It's weird, like that song to me, that's a top 10 Bowie song for me. And definitely like in terms of 80s Bowie, I think it's because he did the remake of it that you mentioned.
Yeah, the Nile Rodgers watered down kind of version.
Yeah, and I think that killed the song off for people. But it's a deep cut that always sounds fantastic when you hear it again. I always loved how Quentin Tarantino used it in Inglourious Bastards, completely like anachronistically. It's World War II, and just that song is so perfect. I think it's just a phenomenal song.
Do you have any idea why just real quick, do either of you know why the remake or the watered down version, as you say, is the version that ended up on the Let's Dance album instead of the superior version?
I think it was a dearth of material. I don't think he had enough stuff written for Let's Dance. And you read interviews with Nile Rodgers, to go back to your earlier question, was it a sellout? Absolutely. Bowie has said many times that he was broke. His management had ripped him off. According to him, he needed a hit. He had signed this new mega deal with EMI, and he wanted to come out swinging. And he went to Nile and said, here's this folky song called Let's Dance. And Nile's like, why are you writing this folk song? It's got to be if you're calling it Let's Dance, it's got to be a banger. And, Bowie, in really uncharacteristic fashion, said, okay, do what you want. Hands off. What? David Bowie giving up control?
Well, this is another thing that I'm curious about that I wonder if either of you know. So the Let's Dance album, as you're saying, John, was definitely a career reboot for David Bowie. It was his most, he was in a slump, not necessarily creatively, but financially, and it completely changed all that, turned it around for him. It was also something that was a real career reboot for Nile Rodgers, who had been sort of suffering from the stupid disco backlash as being associated with that world. And am I mistaken that this is the only album, at least, that the two ever worked on together? Like, why did this not become
Black Tie, White Noise?
Did they?
Yeah, but that was a little more fraught with creative tension because Bowie was not willing to concede as much control that time around. That's why you have strange things like Jump They Say, which is, a weird single. But Let's Dance, if you guys think about it for a second, it's really 3 singles and filler. And I'm saying that as the biggest Bowie fan. You've got Let's Dance, China Girl, Modern Love, Maybe Without You. Then you've got Shake It.
I was about to say Shake It is a bop.
And then you've got a remake of Cat People. And it's not his song, but I love it. And the remake of Metro, Criminal World, which is amazing.
Great song, yes.
But it's not a Bowie written song. He has a history of doing covers on every album. Sure. So that's the cover for this one. But think about that album. It's really, is it 8 songs and it's real short? And he had a little bit of a block, I think.
Also, the bangers are on side 1. He definitely knew which songs were the bangers and which ones were the filler. It's a real like old school side 1 and side 2 are really 2 different records.
Absolutely sequenced. I mean, you come out of the gate with Modern Love, that you know what you're in for.
But I do
think of opening tracks.
Yeah.
Like nobody knew how to, in terms of pacing it, especially beginning it with like a really like evocative manifesto. That's something where he never failed. And Modern Love really sets Let's Dance up to be maybe a little better than it is. But God, what a great song.
Even if the album was uneven and, front loaded, we all know that as we've established, it was a career high commercially and, introduced David Bowie to a whole new audience of fans. So although, John, you corrected me that it wasn't the only time that David Bowie worked with Nile Rodgers, they didn't work together regularly after this and not together for a long time. Do you know why this wasn't like, oh, this worked, let's do another album together, let's have Nile work on Tonight or on Never Let Me Down? Why did that not happen?
I don't know for sure. There's a recess in my memory. Rob, tell me if I'm misremembering this, that I think Bowie actually kind of resented the success a little bit because a lot of it was credited to the production and Nile Rodgers. And, I do remember reading something like that, but who knows what's the truth and lies and somewhere in between. Who knows?
I think he wanted to establish a little independence from Nile Rodgers. Honestly, not having Nile Rodgers produce his next album is arguably the worst decision in a career full of well, that was an odd decision, or that was a questionable decision. This is one that's just a flat out dumb decision. This is one where Bowie just made the absolutely, bonehead move. And it was really, it was sad to see. If I'm sure you all remember hearing Tonight for the first time and reading the back cover and going what, why?
I am not here tonight.
He broke up with Nile Rodgers to record with some other snazzy producer. Who
produced Tonight? Do you know?
Hugh Padgham, right?
Yeah.
Hugh Padgham's no slouch. He's a big name, but
at the time he was like, Hugh Padgham, very top 40 producer, producing very decidedly non-top 40 with the exception of Blue Jean material. You've got Loving the Alien, one of my favorite Bowie songs of all time.
That's a good song.
What a great way to start. Of course, production-wise, it's a little MOR a little bit, You
could say that, yeah.
Yeah, it could be a little edgier, but the song itself, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the reality tour, the video for the reality tour.
I went to it.
He does a version of Loving the Alien, just him and guitar. And it's amazing. And you're like, oh, there's that song that's hidden there under all that 1984 production sludge.
Well, let's talk a bit more about Tonight because I think I see where Rob is going with this. Do you think with this album and albums that followed in the 80s, which we've already established, the 80s for David Bowie was a mixed bag. Did he squander, the goodwill or the opportunity he had with what some people might have called Let's Dance a comeback, or if not a comeback, then a new opportunity to, have a new audience, be a top 40 star the way he had been with Let's Dance. Did he blow it, I guess is what I'm trying to say with Tonight?
Funny you say blow.
Yeah, I think that might have been involved in the decision-making process. It's completely bizarre that he squandered all the new young fans that he'd worked so hard to do. Not just with the album Let's Dance, but with the amazing Serious Moonlight tour, which was so rapturously received. Yes. And which also it showcased material from all over his career to the fans who were just coming in because of the new hit album. So he had done a lot of work to build up a new audience. And then just a year later, he rushed out this completely unnecessary, nobody asked for an album a year later, just really flat out terrible record that really actively turned off a lot of the newfound fans that he'd inspired. And in terms of some of the worst timing of his career, it came out right around the same time as this guy from Minneapolis. His name was Prince.
Oh, yeah.
He put out this album called Purple Rain, which was kind of a hit at the time. And it was, in fact, a much better Bowie record than Bowie's Bowie record was. And
do you feel that he was, sorry to interrupt, do you feel that David Bowie was trying to compete with the younger MTV people, the Princes, the Durans? Did you get that sense?
I don't think he was. I think EMI was. Because think about, you guys take yourselves back to when Tonight came out. Blue Jean, first single, it was doing well. Blue Jean was a hit, top 10, MTV sneak preview video every hour on the hour, either that or the 20-minute version, depending on what hour you watched it. It was great. Second single, Tonight, the title track with Tina Turner. Whoa, wow, why are we picking this?
Because I had Tina Turner on it. I assume she was doing quite well at the time.
It's just such a non-energy track, and he's completely distracted. So I'm sure this, Rob, you say who asked for this record a year later? EMI.
I'm curious, Rob, because you mentioned the Prince thing and how Prince was having an amazing, career high that year. Was there sort of at that time in the fandoms or in the media, whatever, a rivalry? Was there this idea that Prince was the new Bowie, that Prince was unseating Bowie? Was there anything like that?
Well, those were big. Those were big back to school records. Like they were, like late summer, early fall. And if you in your dorm room had a tape of Tonight and a tape of Purple Rain, one tape was going to get played twice. The other one was going to get played 24 times a day. There was Purple Rain was just this like fantastic record, and because there were so many huge artists in 1984, it was such a peak year for pop music, for rock, for all different types of music that had totally taken inspiration from David Bowie. I mean, Van Halen's David Bowie record was better than David Bowie's record. It was like the only person on the radio who couldn't make a good David Bowie record was David Bowie. So, we were all playing Cyndi Lauper's record, which was almost a year old at that point, but it just kept giving up hit after hit. Cyndi Lauper would have been the first one to say that she was just inspired by David Bowie. Madonna, huge hit that year, she would have been the first to say she was inspired by Bowie. And Bowie was the one who sounded like he had completely fallen off. Really abruptly.
Weird choices. Like, okay, I made some money last time, but my buddy James over here needs some cash, Iggy, so we'll cover 3 of his songs on this record.
Well, it worked when he did China Girl. Obviously, that was a song that Bowie had a co-writing credit on, but had originally been done by Iggy. So maybe he thought that was a lightning that could strike twice again.
I will defend Neighborhood Threat. That is a jam.
Okay, well let's talk about Dancing for Blue Jean for a minute, because you mentioned, John, the long version of the video, and it felt so long.
So bloated.
So, when I'm talking about the 20-minute version with the screaming, if I remember the plot of it, David Bowie is playing like a nerdy, awkward guy, which is completely unconvincing, because if there was one thing that David Bowie wasn't, even at his career nadir, he was never like an awkward guy that no girl would ever want to go on a date with. Like that was bad casting. But he's playing this dual role of this like nerdy guy who's trying to impress a girl by taking her to see a Screaming Lord Byron concert and like claiming that they're friends, and I'll introduce you. Am I remembering it right? Because I've been trying.
That's the exact plot.
It could have been. And was Julian Temple the director of that?
Yeah. Julian Temple, and we have to thank him for not only that video, but the Loving the Alien video, bringing us the 2 guys from Right Said Fred, who are in both videos, playing.
That's true.
Miming the bass, and the other guys playing, I believe, guitar.
That is a fun fact. I was going to thank Julian Temple for Man Trap by ABC, another band that obviously
greatest movie of all time.
Thank you. I, of course, interviewed
Vanderpump Rules long before the Vanderpump Rules.
We'll take this conversation. I'll send you the link I did where I interviewed Martin Fry entirely just about Man Trap. He was very confused about why I wanted to talk to him about this. But obviously ABC, another band that owes such a debt to Bowie. I will say, though, the Dancing for Blue Jean video, I looked this up. It won a Grammy that year for best short form video. Should have won for best long form video because it was friggin' 20 minutes long. But
yeah, when they put it out on video cassette, it was a video EP. I'm like, no, this is a video LP.
I remember when this video came out, as you said, they were like premiering it on the hour. It was, back then when MTV was going to premiere video, it was a very big deal. You like stopped what you were doing. I'm beginning to sound like some old person going, we walked to school in the snow, but we waited by the VCR with the tape. We were ready just in case, it never got shown again. In the case of this video, it definitely got shown again. It didn't need to be shown again, but I remember sort of being in denial because I didn't want to admit that I was disappointed or just bored by it. Obviously, once they trimmed the fat, it was a little better. But I did like the look in it. And I will say that very shortly after David Bowie died, it was still January 2016, Moonlight Rollerway, which is a roller rink out here in Los Angeles, did a Bowie skate night with a bunch of people dressed like Bowie, nearly killing themselves trying to skate in costume. But it was a lot of fun. And they had a costume contest. And everybody kind of did the like obvious thing and dressed in Ziggy Stardust wear. It's like the easiest one to do, like paint a Aladdin Sane lightning bolt on your face or whatever. Couple people went for the Harlequin look of scary monsters. But when the guy who came dressed as Screaming Lord Byron in blueface, I was like, he needs to win. And he didn't win. And I think it's maybe because a lot of people like who were judging the contest didn't even get like which persona this was. Cause it was like, but he really had it down. I don't remember liking the video, so I'm trying to say, but I do remember liking the song. And so I don't, you're talking about how this album was terrible, but it did have some redeeming qualities. I think it's when we get to Never Let Me Down, which I've already made the bad joke about, was the never needed to be taken out of the title. It was just Let Me Down.
Yeah, but before we leave tonight, though, another thing about the bad decisions or bad scheduling or whatever they were thinking with this record, there was no video for the second single.
Was there not?
No, there was. It just went from Blue Jean, then that second single Tonight flops, and then they have a nice, beautiful video for Loving the Alien, which, not the most top 40 friendly tune, but what are you going to do?
Do you think that they blew their budget on the 20-minute Blue Jean video and they were like, shit, no more time. We can't do a second video.
I think Tina Turner is so hot in 1984. Her schedule is probably like, look, and we can't get her to do, no time to do a video. David's over in the corner, eating celery and carrots and milk and whatever else, his 70s diet again. So who knows?
Also, they collaborated on a soda pop commercial.
That's right.
Where they changed the lyrics, where actually Bowie sang Modern Love with new lyrics. He revised the lyrics so that they're about a brand of soda pop.
I know.
What was it? Like, I don't want to drink Coke. I want to drink Pepsi.
Now I know the choice is mine.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Oh, no.
It was, yes, it was
That's unfortunate.
Like when they first invented YouTube and you're like, wow, I'm going to look up all these things that I thought were just a bad dream that I had one night in 1985. Like, I was like, nope, it's real. And it's every bit as, I saw that commercial once on MTV at like 2 a.m. Traumatized for life.
You had the Battle of the Soda commercials. You had that one. And then you had Alan Jorgensen's Shasta commercial with Alan Jorgensen. What? You've never heard this? I wanna Shasta, and it's Alan Jorgensen doing the vocals and the instrumentation. I'll have to send
this pre With Sympathy or like With Sympathy era of Ministry?
Right after With Sympathy, when he was looking for Cash, and he's confirmed it's him.
Oh my God!
It's amazing.
I have to hear this. Oh my gosh!
Oh my God! Sometimes the internet is a great thing.
When you see it, you'll remember it because MTV played it every commercial break. You'll come right back to you, flooding back, and you'll freak out.
Well, before we move on to Never Let Me Down, since we're talking about unfortunate or amusing duets, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Dancing in the Street.
South America!
Like, I know, I'm sure.
Greatest video of all time.
It's better without the sound. Speaking of YouTube, like the soundless.
Oh my God.
The soundless Dance in the Street, where they just like put sound effects or musicless Dance in the Street, but like there was cocaine involved in this. I'm gonna assume. You think?
You find it hard to believe that even in the 80s they made that much cocaine. Like, I love how they're constantly copying each other's moves, and like Bowie's doing the jazz fingers, and
so much jazz hands.
They are so like. I mean, they're having such a great time. I love that video. I will defend that video to my dying day.
The genius of David Bowie is at the end with the infamous dual butt shake. Bowie takes the moment to take his white trench coat and flip it over so his butt is exposed properly to the camera. Mm-hmm. You can see the full shake.
I appreciate that.
Seriously.
I appreciate an exposed 80s video Bowie backside. I mean, I liked the unedited China Girl video, the MTV band. That was a good look. I didn't mind that.
Was a drag race reveal before there was a drag race reveal.
I will say, though, when we're talking, I was just talking about how it was so unconvincing in the Blue Jean video that David Bowie was supposed to be this kind of like uncool person, because even at his career lows, he was always the coolest of the cool. The one time that I remember thinking, David Bowie's, this isn't cool, was the Dance in the Street video. I had two of the arguably coolest rock stars that have ever lived in any decade, Mick Jagger, David Bowie. When you think about the two of them sharing a song, sharing a screen together, that's, rock history right there. Both just seeming like drunk uncles at a bar mitzvah. Like, just, it was like the dancing wasn't cool. Now I watch it with fascination, but I do remember thinking like, this is kind of goofy for them. Like, I don't know. Does anyone know like how this came about, that they made, like, was this video choreographed is what I want to know, because it seems like someone just stuck a camera on them and was like, all right guys, you got one, go for it, just inhale this cocaine and do it.
Rob, I think that's how it happened.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, of course, it was timed for Live Aid.
Yeah.
The video has that great all-nighter feel that, like we see them and we see even the sunrise, like at the end where they're dancing, doing their little moves, and you could definitely tell, like, wow, like this incredibly decadent night has passed. Like you feel like you're doing the walk of shame after 3 minutes of watching this video. You're like, I'm crawling home in the cold light of dawn. It's a real Sunday morning coming down ending to that video.
The whole thing has an improv look. Like, okay, I'm going to stick my hand out here through the door, and then you do it too on the other side.
And the whole thing of like, I'm going to, like, while you're singing, I'm just going to bend over and grab my beer from the floor and like sip my beer, put it back down on the floor.
While the camera spins around, that's the best part.
Yeah, I give that video. Sorry,
he did make up for with Live Aid though. His Live Aid performance is amazing.
It completely beautiful. And yes, and speaking of, like Thomas Dolby career high points.
There you go.
And Thomas Dolby has often said that, like David Bowie didn't tell them the set list. So like they go out and he starts calling for songs, and like Thomas Dolby's like, okay, TVC15, I know that one.
Yep.
Wow.
Completely, like David Bowie was just like absolutely fantastic at Live Aid, and had great hair. His hair done by Freddie Mercury's boyfriend.
Yes. But he did TVC15 at Live Aid. Let's take a second.
Yes.
For that. I mean,
exactly.
Heroes, sure, check. Let's Dance, Modern Love, TVC15.
Amazing.
Why was he not on Do They Know It's Christmas? He was one of the missing people from Band Aid, because I believe he might be on the other side. Is he on the side?
He's on the other
side with the messages. Like, this is David Bowie. There's more starving folk on the planet than ever before. His self-parodic, self-parodic, it's the folk like that. I love that entire B-side with the spoken messages.
That's like where the catch-all where like, oh, Frankie Goes to Hollywood couldn't make it, but we'll have them talk on the side here or whatever. But I do remember, for some reason, when I hear that song, Do They Know It's Christmas, in my head, I hear the David Bowie version where he's like, banish shade, like, in that like very dramatic voice. He when they all sing together at the end. I believe he was at Wembley, right? He was at the British version, right? So as we said, the 80s didn't end so well for him, but since I'm trying to keep this a little chronological, and he did have some one-offs, as you mentioned, Rob, and we already discussed Under Pressure, and we discussed Cat People, but we haven't discussed, actually, I really like a couple that were from films, Absolute Beginners, the song, and This Is Not America. I discovered who Pat Metheny was because of the Falcon the Snowman song, This Is Not America. That's a great song.
How can This Is Not America be a hit in America, but Absolute Beginners is not? That's what confuses me. I don't know, not to pit them against each other, but Absolute Beginners is hook central. What's going on? Was
that not a hit here?
Yeah, 60s.
Okay. Totally, well, the charts.
Dragged down by the movie, really. It's funny. Yeah. My sister loved that song at the time, and she was like, this is David Bowie's best song ever. And I was like, no, it's terrible. And then when I went to see Lazarus in the theater, his, the small theatrical production that he was doing at the time that he died, and there's this incredibly beautiful scene where they do Absolute Beginners. And immediately after leaving the theater, I texted my sister. I was like, by the way, this argument that we've been having about Absolute Beginners for the past 30 years, you won this one. It is every bit as great as you say. Completely beautiful song. Buried a bit under the 80s production, but just like a beautiful song that, we really missed the boat not making that one a hit.
And 6.5 minutes long. Let's not forget that. It could use a trim.
How high did This Is Not America chart, John? You know these things.
20s, like mid-20s, 27. Oh, yeah.
It was a respectable hit.
Yeah, one of those turntable hits, as they say.
Turntable hits. Well,
I can't believe you said that. Oh, my gosh.
I'm just saying.
Well, since we're talking about films, how much time you got to talk about Labyrinth and The Hunger? Oh. How much time you got, guys? Because that could be a podcast in its own.
Forever and ever.
So obviously there's so much to talk about when it comes to David Bowie in the 1980s that we, unsurprisingly, are going to have to make this a two-parter. Rob, can we convince you to come back to talk more Bowie next time?
Let's dance.
All right. So I am Lyndsey Parker. I've been joined today by John Hughes and Rob Sheffield, and we will be back next time to talk more David Bowie. Until then, remember to give us a rate and review on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll catch you next time.
This was Totally 80s, the podcast dedicated to the music of the greatest decade ever. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Totally 80s, and please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until our next episode, catch you on the flip side.